We're all aware of what running is, but how can running actually be defined? According to Dr. McLean, running is moving quickly by moving the legs more rapidly than at a walking speed, such that for an instant during each step, both feet are off the ground. For a split second, it's almost as if you're flying. So what makes running so much more special than walking? Running fast is key in most sports, whether it's the ability to beat a defender, run faster than your opponent, or increase your velocity to reach your ultimate jumping height. Running tends to occur at faster speeds than walking. However, according to MathWare, speed walkers can achieve speeds up to 4.6 meters per second during an unusual gait in which the hip is dropped for each step. As we learned in lecture, we are able to measure the forces involved in the stance phase of running. This is called kinetics, or the study of movement and the forces involved in the producing of it. Newton's third law of motion tells us that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is the reason that forces in running can be measured by using a force plate. When taking a step on the ground, you produce a force vector that is generally downward and backward. The ground pushes back and produces a force that is mostly upward and forward. Therefore, it is the ground reaction force that is measured by the force plate. To get a better understanding of ground reaction forces, let's look further at the ground reaction force data. The walking vertical ground reaction force data exhibits two notable peaks. The first peak represents the time just after the heel strikes the ground and the center of gravity is traveling downward, resulting in an increased reaction force from the ground in the vertical direction. The second peak corresponds to the foot or the toe pushing off the ground, applying a force into the ground, which is again matched by an increase in the ground reaction force. For you to actually move faster, your stances must become shorter. This shortening of the stance actually gives less time to produce an impulse, so therefore the peak forces must be higher. Impulse is calculating by computing the impact force multiplied by the time over which the impact force actually occurs. The impulse for one step of a run is approximately constant regardless of the method of running. Think about the force on the knee for a stiff-legged run step compared to a bent knee step. Now, recall that the force is the impulse divided by the impact time. For a stiff-legged run, the impact time is shorter, so the force on the knee is larger. In the bent knee scenario, the impact time is longer, so the force on the knee is smaller. It is because of these high peak ground reaction forces at impact that help contribute to the transmission of force through the rest of the body, mainly the skeletal system, which can cause shin splints and stress fractures. Measurements are expressed as a percentage of body weight, where a value of one body weight is the force exerted to support the body while standing. As you can imagine, the larger the person, the greater the force they will be portraying on the ground, and the greater the ground reaction force will be pushing back. During level running, ground reaction forces can be broken into vertical ground reaction forces and horizontal ground reaction forces. In incline running, however, the terms normal and parallel ground reaction forces are substituted for vertical and horizontal because when running on an incline, the words vertical and horizontal become inaccurate in describing the direction of the forces actually being applied. For the running vertical ground reaction force data, there is a large single peak with a very sizable impact peak. As your center of gravity travels towards the plate, your body increases the force it is applying on the ground, and in return, the ground is applying a greater force on the body. Another important aspect of the analysis of sport and injury is the pattern of foot striking. When running with shoes on, most people are classified as rear foot strikers, meaning they land on their heels when running, as opposed to the middle or the forefoot. One study by Adam Dowd et al. Showed that 74% of runners experience a moderate or severe injury each year, but those who habitually rear foot strikers had approximately twice the rate of repetitive stress injuries than the individuals who use forefoot for striking. One possible explanation for this is the absence of a marked impact peak in the ground reaction force during a forefoot strike compared with a rear foot strike that may contribute to lower rates of injuries in the habitual forefoot strikers. Rear foot strikers are more likely to sustain stress fractures because of the heel being a bony point of contact, whereas the forefoot strikers are more likely to sustain soft tissue damage due to the soft tissue in the middle and forefoot. The last important influential aspect of running that we will talk about today is the biomechanical influence of tendons and ligaments, shared with us by Norden et al. During running, the muscles and the bones of the skeletal system go through a rough workout that would be nearly impossible to sustain without the help of tendons and ligaments. Along with the joint capsule, tendons and ligaments are the primary structures that surround, connect, and stabilize the joints of the human skeletal system. Ligaments in the joint capsule, which connect bone to bone by augmenting the mechanical stability of the joints to guide joint motion and by preventing excess motion. The tendons and the muscles form the muscle-tendon unit, which acts as a dynamic restraint. Tendons enable the muscle belly to be an optimal distance from the joint on which it acts without requiring an extended length of muscle between origin and insertion. The arrangement of the collagen fibers in the tendon is almost parallel, which allows them to withstand high unidirectional loads. Ligaments, however, have a less parallel arrangement, which allows them to sustain predominant tensile stresses in one direction as well as smaller stresses in other directions. During injury, tendons and ligaments undergo deformation before failure. When the ultimate tensile stress of these tissues is surpassed, complete failure occurs very rapidly and their load-bearing ability is dramatically decreased. In order to minimize damage, these tissues are viscoelastic or rate-dependent. This quality allows these tissues to display an increase in strength and stiffness with an increased loading rate. An additional effect of rate dependency is the slow deformation or creep that occurs when tendons and ligaments are subjected to a constant low load over an extended period of time. Stress relaxation takes place when these structures sustain a constant elongation over time. Another important factor that influences the mechanical properties of tendons and ligaments is age. Age results in a decline in the mechanical properties of tendons and ligaments, that is, their strength, stiffness, and ability to withstand deformation. For this reason, it is particularly important for older athletes to take extra precautions when performing strenuous exercises such as running. The last influential factor on the structure of tendons and ligaments that we are going to talk about today is sex. Women are at particularly high risk for tendon and ligament damage when compared to men because of increased hormones such as relaxin. Particularly during pregnancy, women produce a high amount of this hormone, which causes the tendons and ligaments to become stiff and therefore increases the risk of injury. So now you may ask, what can I do to prevent such injury while running? Research has shown that acute stretching does very little to increase strength and prevent injury. However, chronic stretching may be helpful. One study by Henderson et al. Showed that the eccentric exercises can be used in the treatment of Achilles tendonitis, a common injury in runners. Now that you have all this important biomechanical information on running, get out there and do it.